Good morning. What we are going to talk about today concerns each and every one of us because we're all young, we have young friends, we may have younger brothers or sisters, and we are all starting a career in which we will have to treat young people at some point. And even though we may be coming from different backgrounds, drugs and drug abuse may have impacted our lives one way or another. We may have tried recreational drugs, we may know someone who uses or has used drugs, or we may have been offered them at a party or at school. Today, our purpose is to talk to you about drugs use in Hong Kong and more specifically about drug use among teenagers. My name is Lorena and these are my classmates Janet, Sharon, Connor, and Gag. We prepared this presentation because we would like to talk to you about the current situation in our city, to tell you a little bit about the biological reasons behind substance abuse, some of the drugs that young people are taking and the effects they have on their lives, and also about some of the initiatives in Hong Kong that are being taken on to control drug abuse. Also, we would like to tell you how we can start from today to take action and help solve this crisis. At the end, we will also have a brief Q&A session. So let's start with the first item, the current situation. Gagan, please.
Thank you, Lorena. Now, although the rates of teen drug use in Hong Kong are much lower than those in Western countries, there is still a significant concern that these reported cases are just the tip of the iceberg, as a lot of recreational drug use among teenagers remain hidden. The results of the 2016 survey of drug use among students revealed that the number of students who claim to have taken drugs dropped by 17%, from 17,500 in the 2011 to 2012 survey to 14,500, which was in line with the trends of the Central Registry of Drug Abuse figures. However, some claim that this drop might be related to the use of opiates like marijuana and not synthetics or party drugs like ecstasy. These observations are backed by customs data, which shows a rise of 157% in the amounts of GBL, or gamma-butyrolactin, seized at the border from 2015 to 2016. The same survey also discovered that 81% of drug-taking students reported they had never sought help from anyone, which suggests the hidden nature of drug abuse. Moving on to the reasons why young people take drugs, here's a graph presented by the Central Registry of Drug Abuse. Now, at the top of the graph, we see over half of the interviewees under 21 reported boredom, depression, and stress as one of the most common reasons for using drugs. Next, we find peer influence, followed in less degree by sensory satisfaction and euphoria, curiosity, and withdrawal discomfort at the bottom. Now, we as care providers should keep these reasons in mind in order to help students find strategies to cope and build resilience to them. But there's another question that needs to be explored. Why is it that teenagers are more vulnerable to drug addiction than adults? Connor will explain all about this to you.
Thank you, Gagan. As you might be aware, advances in neuroscience are constantly improving our understanding of how the brain develops. The neurological explanation for why teenagers might be more susceptible to drug addiction involves the interaction between two parts of the brain. Now, the first part of the brain is the prefrontal cortex, and this processes things like, our understanding, organization, planning, and evaluation of the consequences of our actions. The second part of the brain is the nucleus accumbens, and this part processes things like fear, motivation, reinforcement learning, and most importantly for this presentation, pleasure. So, which part of the brain do you think develops first? Right, it's the pleasure and reward circuit. The part of the brain that processes cause and effect doesn't fully develop until our mid-20s. So, this can help explain why teenagers generally seek out excitement and pleasure. Since they lack a fully developed part of the brain that can process cause and effect, they can be more susceptible to drug addiction and the potentially devastating consequences of them. Now, in regards to those consequences, my partner Sharon is going to explain a little bit more.
Thank you, Connor. Adolescence is an important time for both physical and psychological development, and using addictive substances at this juncture is particularly dangerous because young people's brains are still growing. As you may imagine, a child's brain and body are less developed and are therefore less resistant and tolerant of the effects of drugs. So let's start talking about a few of them and their effects. Our first drug is cocaine. It's a strong stimulant that's usually snorted or injected into a vein. Its mental effects include a loss of contact with reality, intense feelings of happiness, and agitation. Chronic cocaine intake may cause heart attacks. Our next drug is marijuana. It's the most popular drug among teens in countries such as the US and Britain. It's widely regarded as a gateway drug because it can lead to other drugs. Marijuana use at a young age can have a long-term impact on focus and memory. Our third drug is ketamine. It's a quick-acting anesthetic that's usually snorted as a powder. It causes users to hallucinate and lose their sense of time and reality. Teenagers in Hong Kong like ketamine because it's cheap, it's easy to use, and it gets them high quickly. Frequent ketamine use are associated with problems relating to long-term memory and coordination. Our next drug is ecstasy. Although it's less common in Hong Kong, it's known as a club drug because it's widely available at raves, concerts, and dance clubs. This drug makes emotions much more intense because it combines stimulant effects with empathogenic effects, meaning it can incite feelings of empathy and sympathy. Ecstasy can also cause cramps, nausea, seizures, and brain damage. Our last drug is cough and cold medicines. Some of these contain the ingredient dextromethorphan, known as DXM or DM for short. It's usually extracted from cough medicines, converted into a powder, and then snorted. When taken in large quantities, it can cause hallucinations, out-of-body experiences, seizures, brain damage, and even death. So all of these substances described above can harm the development of young adults. However, there's a widespread misconception among teenagers that some drugs like marijuana and ketamine are less harmful than harder narcotics such as heroin and cocaine. This is not true, as research has shown that softer drugs often lead to harder ones. The earlier teenagers use drugs, the earlier they become addicted. Addiction is almost always a factor in many accidental overdoses, with serious consequences impacting teenagers and their families. But what is being done to prevent drug abuse? Janet will now talk to you about some initiatives in Hong Kong aimed at helping people dealing with addiction.
Thank you, Sharon. Now let me start with the actions taken by the Hong Kong government. In 2015, the government Narcotics Division launched a program called Star Parents Program. It encouraged parents to visit the anti-drug events held at schools and listen to a 26-episode series of interviews broadcast on RTHK5's radio program, Stand By Me. Schools' involvement in this initiative is the key. So much so that a number of institutions actually have taken a step further in instituting the compulsory random urine or hair sampling for students. So if students take the tests and shows positive, they need to face some further drug tests, compulsory counseling, suspension, or even expulsion. However, do you think that stigmatizing the suffering from substance dependence is correct? Addiction can be a shameful secret for some users, and shaming this kind of substance abusers is an extremely quick way to prevent them from seeking for help, even if they really need it. Because sometimes people prefer to suffer in silence than to risk the ridicule from their family, friends, and peers. Independent organizations like the Cali Support Group, they've adopted a different approach. They actually primarily focus on the early intervention for students and parents by educating them around the different types of drugs on the market and their effects. They've actually got a very interesting program called Gets Positive, which uses circus skills. Yes, you heard correctly. Circus skills like juggling or diabolo training to help the secondary school students to release their stress and boost their confidence. Cali is the first NGO in Hong Kong granted the Certified Social Circus Training created in 1995 by the famous Circuit du Monde to help the at-risk youth. Now, let's bring this issue back to our classroom and think about the things that we, as future care providers, can do to help the students and their parents in their battle against the drugs. Lorena, please continue.
Thank you, Janet. Touching the lives of millions as nurses do every day, we will be in a unique position to affect the way in which people suffering from addiction are perceived and treated. The diversity that the nursing profession allows gives us a great chance to actually start a conversation and educate the public as well as other healthcare professionals by staying current with the latest literature, and also by initiating discussions with other nursing professionals. We will be able to fully understand the effects that drugs have on adolescent health and start working together to make a difference. Let me tell you about a few things we can start doing today. Number one, we can start doing research in order to find the gaps in the literature regarding drugs abuse. Number two, we can initiate discussions with other nursing students and teachers in order to identify how it is that drug abuse affects our own community. Number three, we can get involved in prevention programs or volunteer for groups like Kelly. We don't need to wait until we start working at a hospital and we receive our first addicted patient. We can start now, from today, by listening to our presentation and engaging in the conversation. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Yes, I've got one question. Some people will always be, young people will always be curious and want to try alcohol and drugs. Isn't this just part of growing up, don't you think? Maybe government organisations and groups like Kelly, for example, should be addressing this aspect. What do you think?
I can take this question. It's certainly possible that some students seek out these substances through sheer curiosity. I think we saw in that one graph it's about 20%. But it would seem that the vast majority of them, the reasons are things more like peer pressure and maybe self-medication for mental illness or mental unwellness. At any rate, as educators, as health providers, as adults, we don't want to stifle the curiosity of our students, but what we can do is encourage them to think critically about the reasons for seeking out these substances and to get them to really be introspective about their motivations.
Could I ask one more question? Personally, I think identifying vulnerable individuals versus curious teenagers might be one way to understand the youth in Hong Kong and drug abuse. Do you know if this has been investigated in Hong Kong? Have you found any research on this?
That's a really good question. We didn't come across studies of this type during our research, but I think it would be a very viable investigation, and it's a good starting point to finding out more about this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We would also like to leave you some questions for you to think about. If you want, you can approach us and we can start the discussion today. Here are some questions. Thank you.